In the name of the living God, amen. As the years go by, the less I know, and the more I wonder. And the more I wonder, the more I try to be okay with trusting without knowing. When I was in 5th grade, my grandmother, whom I absolutely adored, finally could not live on her own. At first, she moved into our house with us, but it wasn't long before she required much more care than my parents could give, so they moved her into a nursing home. I can't even begin to tell you how much I hated that nursing home. It smelled funny. She had a roommate who always seemed to be moaning. It really was the best that we could do, but I hated it. But when it came down to it, the real reason I hated it was because I was afraid. Because even though nobody would talk about it, I knew that she had gone there to die. Now, I had experienced death before. I'd had cats die, but not a person, and certainly not anyone I loved as much as I loved Granana. That's what my brother and I called her. Now, I was a fairly peculiar child. Religion fascinated me. I loved the religion class taught by the Episcopal priest at my school. My mom gave me a copy of Autobiography of a Yogi when I was in 4th grade, and I read it cover to cover. I seriously wonder now what my teachers thought when I brought that book to school and read it during recess, but at the time, it didn't seem weird to me. And it didn't bother me that I was hearing different things about God and about Jesus. It didn't bother me that SRF was telling me that Jesus was one of a line of enlightened avatars or incarnations of God, and that Father DeReich was telling me that Jesus was the only Son of God. I guess I figured all that stuff would get sorted out eventually. What mattered to me was that I knew beyond a shadow of a doubt that there was a God. Looking back, I think I was so deeply certain about God's existence because I needed to be. I was growing up in a world that confused me more and more every day, and now I was facing losing forever this person who had always delighted in me, and I really didn't feel delighted in a lot of the time. It was grace that I absolutely knew that God existed, because I sure needed to know God existed. So one night as I was going to bed, I talked to God because I just knew God was there. And I said to God, I need you to promise me that you won't let Granana die. Do you promise? And in my heart, I was sure, I just knew that God had said, okay, I promise. I'm not sure if it was a couple weeks or a couple months later when my mom sat my brother and I down on the couch after school and told us that Granana had died. And we were sad and we cried, but more than that, I was furious. I felt betrayed. I ran into my room and I screamed at God, you promised! And this time, I didn't hear an answer. Martha said to Jesus, Rabbi, if you had been here, my brother would never have died. Yet even now I know that whatever you ask of God, God will give you. Mary and Martha's brother had died. They are devastated. They are heartbroken. And Jesus finally shows up 4 days too late. Mary didn't even come to meet him. Maybe she had to tend to all the people coming to comfort them. Maybe her heart was too broken, not only by her brother's death, but what must have been felt like Jesus' betrayal of their love for him, and she couldn't even bear to look at him. But not Martha. Martha was a woman on a mission. She stormed right up to Jesus and said, "Rabbi, if you had been here, my brother would never have died. Yet even now, I know that whatever you ask of God, God will give you, so get to work." And Jesus puts her off. Jesus says, "Your brother will rise." But Martha ain't having none of this. Martha says to him, "I know that he will rise in the resurrection on the last day. That's not what I'm talking about, and you know it." Martha is absolutely certain. Twice here, John's gospel has her say, "I know." I understand Martha's certainty. I really do. She is devastated. Her world is falling apart. She needs to know. Her certainty is her hope. I don't begrudge her that at all. Martha saying, "I know," is not only incredibly human, it's also incredibly predictable. John's gospel is kind of into certainty. The Greek word for know, oida, occurs 16 times in John's gospel, more than twice as much as any other book of the Bible, more than in the other 3 canonical gospels combined. Why? Well, I'm no biblical scholar, but I wonder if it might have to do with the fact that John's gospel was the latest gospel written after the destruction of the Second Temple. You see, the place where the Jewish people knew that God resided for more than 500 years was gone. And so just as the question on Martha's lips was, "Where were you, Jesus?" the question on Jews' lips was, "Where are you, God?" It was a time of upheaval and crisis, the very kind of time that history teaches us that fundamentalisms are born from and thrive on. Because the same impulse that led me as a 5th grader to be so certain that God not only existed but would save my grandma is the same impulse that led Martha in her devastation to tell Jesus, "I know if you had been here, my brother would not have died," is the same impulse that gave rise to this gospel that is the most fundamentalistic of the 4 canonical gospel texts, is the same impulse that is giving rise to fundamentalisms across our nation and around the world today. Now, we need certainty. We need fundamentals and foundations so life can have some predictability. We need to know that gravity exists and is dependable. We need to know that an object hasn't disappeared forever just because it leaves our view. We need certainty. And yet, instead of being a safe foundation on which to grow and risk and explore, sometimes certainty can make our world smaller and separate us from one another. We need certainty. And at the same time, certainty, fundamentalism, can be a dangerous thing. And it never happens in a vacuum. There are conditions that create our need for certainty. There are conditions that create the fundamentalisms that limit rather than liberate. And the first step toward addressing them is to meet the impulse that creates them with compassion. I was afraid. Martha was afraid. John's community was afraid. Our world is afraid. We are afraid. That's not an indictment. That's not weakness. That's being human. When we tend towards fundamentalisms, when certainty leads us to exclude and wound one another, when we begin to wield supposed absolute truth as a weapon to consolidate our power and protect it against change that might liberate another, yet create uncomfortable uncertainty for ourselves, before anything else, before condemning any fundamentalism, we have to ask one another and ourselves the core question that births all limiting fundamentalisms. What are you afraid of? What am I afraid of? What are we afraid of? It wouldn't have done any good to tell that grieving, angry fifth grader that he shouldn't have been so sure, that he should have been less certain, to condemn him, to condemn me for my fundamentalism. What I needed was someone to sit with me and love and ask me that one question. What are you afraid of? Because what I was afraid of was that not only would I never see my grandnana again, I was afraid that nobody would ever delight in me the way she did. I was afraid that I would never again have what I lost when she died, that my lovability, my delightfulness, my goodness was tied to something that could die and never return. A few minutes ago, I said, as the years go by, the less I know and the more I wonder. And the more I wonder, the more I try to be okay with trusting without knowing. Fundamentalism is not limited to one theological or political side because fear is not limited to one side. The fundamentalisms of the left or even the center can be prisons too, even when clothed in the language of love and inclusion. Since that day in fifth grade, I have certainly had my moments of theological and political and other kinds of certainty. I have them still. And there are times that I need that certainty, both because it can give me a foundation to reach out and because my fear can be so great. And as the years go by, I have tried. I have tried to know less and wonder more. I met people and have been part of communities who accepted me as I am, who said, when you're going through hard times, we'll be right there with you. When you are afraid, we will sit with you so you won't have to be alone. And I have allowed myself to wonder, could that be true? I went to South Sudan, and I met a bishop named Bulandali who, when soldiers from the north marched to his church, was forced to dig his own grave and then kneel before it with a gun to his head, only to have his life spared when the soldiers' hearts were turned by the sound of him praying, not for his own life, but for the souls of his would-be murderers in their native language. And I allowed myself to wonder, could love be that powerful? I sat with women who have survived child rape, sexual assault, violence, imprisonment, and drug abuse, and watched them find healing for body, mind, and spirit in community with each other. And I allowed myself to wonder, can love really heal everybody? I have stood with incredibly courageous young black queer activists facing militarized police armed only with their voices and their hope, and I allowed myself to wonder, could Jesus really be a revolutionary of love? And I have come to this community, to you, as All Saints Church, in all my imperfections as your rector, at times leaping before I listened, trying to make your language of love my own, and have been inspired by your dedication, faith, and love. And I am allowing myself to wonder, can we be that community of radical inclusion and love? Love that is powerful, love that heals everybody, love that walks with the revolutionary Jesus without judgment, doing justice courageously, embracing life joyfully, reverently inviting all faiths and peoples into relationship for the healing and transformation of ourselves, our community, and the world. As the years go by, I really do find the less I know and the more I wonder. And the more I wonder, the more I try to be okay with trusting without knowing. Jesus said to Martha, "Your brother will rise." And Martha replied, "Oida, I know that he will rise in the resurrection on the last day," her fear fueling her certainty. But then look at what Jesus says. Jesus says to her, I am the resurrection and the life. The one who believes in me, even though they die, will live, and everyone who lives and believes in me will never die. Do you believe this? Martha says, Oida, I know. And Jesus replies 3 times, Pisteuo. Not do you believe. That's not the best translation with all its connotations of intellectual assent. Not do you believe, but do you trust? That's right. Martha in her fear says, I know. Jesus in his love says, do you trust? Do you trust in me? Our faith is not about believing in a set of certain rules, but learning, struggling with, trying to trust in deep relationship, the kind of secure relationship that we all need to feel safe enough to break out of our fundamentalisms that limit and risk and move into a life where we can change and grow. Jesus doesn't demand that we know anything. Certainly not that we know anything about God or know anything about Jesus. Jesus invites us to wonder and to trust without knowing. To trust that even though so much of the world has taught us that love is not for us, to trust that maybe it actually is. To trust that even though we don't know what happens when we die, that the love we find in each other is strong enough to reach beyond that veil of death. To trust that even though we don't know really who Jesus was or who God is, to wonder that maybe if we walk together in love, we will never be alone. Love will prevail, and we can truly become free. As the years go by, the less I know, and the more I wonder, and the more I wonder, the more I try to be okay with trusting without knowing. So if you're coming to me looking for answers, if you come to me looking for certainty, more and more the answer you may get is, I don't know. And I do wonder. Because as the years go by, the less I know and the more I wonder. I hope that we can wonder together. Wonder about the power of love. And together find that place beyond knowing and unknowing, where we can wonder and love and trust together.